Okay, here we go. How are we going to intro this? Why don't you intro it?
Okay.
Do it.
Oh my gosh.
Do it now. No pressure. And action.
Hey, Rez, we're here in the podcast, and today we're talking about youth and the church.
Yeah. Way to go.
Thanks.
That was a really good introduction, Melissa.
I'm Melissa Gray, and I'm joined here with Sean McCain, Tiras.
It's like you forgot who I was. And then what? That's great. Thanks, Melissa. I'm excited to have this conversation because we just got done with Youth Sunday this last Sunday, and man, I was so encouraged by that. I thought it was just an incredible thing. We've done Youth Sundays in the past, or like Kids Sundays, but I can't remember one that was so fun. Actually, how did that go for you? I'm curious. And if you, by the way, if you're listening in and haven't missed that Sunday or whatever, we recruited as many of our teens as we could to serve in the church, in liturgy, doing stuff behind the scenes with tech, with reading, and with prayers, really everything but preaching, which, you know what, it would be awesome to get a teen to like preach up there. That'd be awesome too. But it was a really cool moment for our youth to be visibly all together present in serving roles and leading roles in the church, so that we as the church could really appreciate and celebrate them as such a central part of the life of our church.
Yeah.
So I was really encouraged by that.
Yeah, me too.
How'd it go for you?
It was great. I mean, it was easy for me because the youth were like open and ready and willing to like jump in and help.
We have the best youth.
I just put out a call and asked where they wanted to serve, and they jumped right in. And then afterwards, what was really cool is a lot of them, it was the first time they had ever served in that role. And then several of them came up and asked if they could do it on a regular basis.
That's super cool.
Which I think is exactly, the Youth Sunday did exactly what we wanted it to do. It opened up an opportunity for our teens to become more active in our church communally.
Super cool. And like you're saying, some of these kids had never done those things. And so imagining themselves and then actually doing the thing, going, I really want to do this. It's a perfect example of what the church's responsibility is for helping our youth find their place in the church, how they fit, how they're important. And what's really amazing, like our church is amazing. Someone told me, like, where'd you get all these kids? And for some reason, we just have a billion kids. We're so many kids. And to see all of the kids up there leading and present, it just feels like a really youthful church. Like we have so many amazing people who are leading and serving in that way. So I'm like, it's a gift. I guess what I'm saying is it's a huge gift. Not every church is like that. And there's something special about the youth at Res.
Oh yeah, for sure. And also, can we shout out the little kids?
Oh yeah.
Because there were no kids classes, and so they all sat through the entire service, and they did an amazing job.
Can we talk about this for a second? Because I think this is important. So as a parent, okay, I'll be honest. I'm leading the liturgy usually, and my wife, poor Michelle.
As a parent is so hard.
It's so hard for me. I see my wife sometimes, especially earlier on when our kids were really little, struggling in the pew with our kids. But it's like really hard work to have kids in the service. And I think that there's this temptation, or really there's an expectation. If you have the wrong kind of expectation, it's going to be really rough.
Right.
So I offer this, honestly, I'm really even nervous saying this because I really sympathize with parents who are managing kids, especially parents like my wife who's single parenting in the pew with 6 kids.
And Bliss. Shout out to Bliss.
And we have a few of those.
We have a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's no small thing. And the thing I hear from them is like the moment where their expectation about kids in the church, when that changed from I'm going to church to get my worship on and have my time with Jesus and like not have kids crawling all over me, which sounds awesome. And there's a place for that. Right. But in the liturgy, there's maybe a different expectation that we're actually all getting to work here. And some of that work for parents is teaching your kids how to worship and like welcome them into the life of the worshiping church and modeling to them. And part of that is for the rest of us to like, not just tolerate noise or kids being, like, what do you call it when they're just like constantly moving around and, doing their thing, but like not just tolerating that, but actually recognizing that they have a place in the church too. It's not all about you. Like with everyone, who takes up space in the church, we want more than tolerance. We want like encouragement and love and support. And so we have a special call to do that even with our kids. And so I think that it's really important that people understand that their expectations should be not so self-serving, but actually like, hey, we have work to do here. And how beautiful is that work? How eternal is that work when we are investing in the lives of our kids? Helping them like make their way up to communion with the hands and what's that teaching them with their bodies when they like make the sign of the cross with the baptismal water, when they stand and sit and do things with the community. And then when they go and light the candles and like and fold their hands and pray, you know, there's just so many tactile embodied motions and words and like things you're doing that I think are doing really good formative work in our kids, that parents, like this is the opportunity we have to like help shape our kids in a really important way.
For sure.
So be encouraged is what I'm trying to say. It's your work is not unnoticed. It's hard. And I sympathize, but man, it's really, really good work.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And that's why, you know, this opportunity of every fifth Sunday, taking a break from kids' classes and welcoming the whole community in to worship together. It gives families an opportunity to do that and not feel like they have to do it every single Sunday.
Right. People may not know that we're doing this every fifth Sunday.
Newsflash.
It's not random.
News alert.
Which happens, it doesn't happen every month.
No, it doesn't. It only happens maybe 4 or 5 times a year.
Yeah. But it's pretty quick. It's pretty sweet. I think so I'm looking forward to the next one.
It's in September, heads up.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. September has 5 weeks, 5 Sundays.
It has 5 Sundays.
Goodness. What's happening to this world?
I don't know.
I don't remember September with 5 Sundays. Has that always been the case?
I don't.
It's like a leap year thing?
I was actually just about to ask if it...
Is it inflation?
It's probably inflation.
Probably not. Oh my gosh. What were you going to ask?
No, I was going to say, I wonder if it changes every year.
It's got to.
This is a dumb question, but...
No, someone is going to find out.
What is the answer? Tell us.
There you go. There's your assignment. All right. So that was super cool. We're coming off of that high and can I talk about this for a second? Preaching to our youth was intimidating, actually. I was like, I could preach to adults. Like I'm more comfortable with that, but preaching to the youth, I'm like, oh boy, I better not miss an opportunity. But, and I also think this was something that was really impressed. Something I learned as I was preparing to preach, a few things. One was I was reminded how important the youth are to the life of the church and how easy it is to overlook really anyone who's not like you, to be honest. That's always the human temptation. But especially our youth, how easy it is to overlook. It can be to like build a church around adults.
Yeah.
You know, and not like empowering youth and not getting out of the way and really getting behind them, not making it about just us, but actually like they need to take up space, rightfully so.
Yeah.
So that was cool to be reminded like, oh, I'm so glad that we have this gift of youth and kids. And then the other thing was like, do I have anything to say to them? And then this conversation in my head was so often people like me, and I said this in our sermon, and clergy like me, like people older than kids, like an old person in the church like me, we assume that we can tell kids like all the answers about how to follow Jesus, but really we're still figuring it out.
Yeah.
And we certainly should offer insights about what we're learning, but they're growing up in a really different world.
For sure.
And they're really different people.
Yeah.
And they've got to answer some of these questions too. And I was like, that's actually way more fun, right? Than like lecturing kids.
Oh yeah.
About why they should follow Jesus rather than asking them a question and
or just inviting them to come along on the journey of trying to figure out what it means to follow Jesus.
Yeah, that's exhilarating to me. I think that's super fun. So those are some of the things that I was walking away going, this Youth Sunday, it leaves us with some lessons too.
Oh, for sure.
Like it's not just for the kids, actually, the youth, it's us adults. Like we're learning some stuff here too, I think. Well, anyways, let's jump into this. Why I have some questions, and I thought this would be a good episode to, as we've come off of Youth Sunday, to just ask some questions about like, why is it important for us to focus on the youth in the church? And just to talk a little bit about, especially in support of parents with youth, but also in support of other adults that are spiritual mothers and fathers, tios and tias of our youth. Like everybody has a role to play. And in fact, when we baptize, right, we have that moment where we ask the church, are you willing to raise these kids up in the way of the Lord? And they said, heck yeah. And we welcome you into the household of God. So the church is involved in this work with the youth, serving them. And so I wanted to spend our time on this episode asking like why we need to talk about this and talk about the sort of world that the youth are growing up in that we know very little about actually, and just appreciate a little bit like they're important. And this is a really complex question. So there's some of that. And I also thought it'd be interesting, I should say, to talk about like, so what are some of the key ways that we approach youth ministry? What are the things that are important to us as parents and as ministry leaders and other adults in the life of the church? What's important for Res about how we lead, inform, and serve our youth? So that's what the episode is going to be about today. This will be interesting. Yeah. It'll only be, I think, a 2-hour episode. So
it won't a little be that bit to
long.
Cover. Yeah.
It's fine.
It's totally fine.
We gotta land this thing, but because we got a pool party.
We have a pool party.
I love our job.
Speaking of youth.
That's such a pain. Sorry guys, I gotta go to a pool party. It's tough being a priest. So why do we need to talk about our youth? I was doing some research on this and found so I went to Fuller and I knew about the Fuller Youth Institute. If you don't know about the Fuller Youth Institute, it's a great resource online, like a sort of a think tank and resource producing, book writing resource for youth ministry. It's really good. Yeah. So I'm like, I mean, I haven't vetted everything, but that's Fuller. They're awesome. Yeah. So, and one of the things that I found really interesting was that they have really done a good job identifying what are the challenges that are facing youth in the world today. And I'm curious what you think about this. One of the top things that they mention is about mental health. Yeah. And so, why do we need to talk about the youth in the church? Well, I'd say to become aware of the challenges they're facing, so that we can actually companion them as they walk in this life, in this world with Jesus, with us. Right. So getting in touch with and listening to them about those challenges will help us to like talk about our faith in ways that directly apply to the challenges they're actually facing. And as opposed to the challenges that we faced. Right. That we assume they're facing. Right. It's just different. So mental health came up as one of those challenges. And we certainly had mental health challenges. We just didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about it. And so I think that adults now have always had mental health challenges, but just like with youth, how we're talking about it more, adults are also talking about it more. Yeah. So adults are also going through mental health challenges, but just think about the youth going through these challenges. And while on the one hand, it's great that we know about it, and so it's not hiding. So we're able to get youth and teens the help that they need, that we probably all could have gotten when we were youth and teens in our formative years, to help them build those neuro pathways. And even to normalize the conversation. For sure. And in the church, and normalize, like, what does mental health look like as a Christian? Because there, you know, you do need medication, and like, that's okay. But also we have someone that we can lean on, and other things and ways that we can like meditate to help us with our anxieties or mental health. Yeah. So like being aware that mental health is something that also, like, we assume sometimes that maybe youth aren't dealing with mental health, right? Because they're just out, they're dealing with mental health is a thing for everybody. And knowing that, just as a really good example, knowing that as leaders and as adults in their life, it immediately brings to mind ways that I think we could support. Yeah. Right. So like having the youth over for a lunch on a Sunday and paying attention to like the kids and asking them how they're doing, and paying attention to the signs of isolation, depression, anxiety, other mental health things, and being prepared to like care for people and point people to like the right kinds of help or resources or. So I think like that being on the radar is just a helpful thing. I'm not saying like raise your hand if you have mental health, right? But just as adults, knowing that that's in the mix, and being like attentive to it.
Right.
And then trying to figure out with kids, like, how do you walk that road with mental health challenges? That's a big deal. Another thing comes to mind, again, just realizing this is a big deal, is paying attention to what we say. So first of all, how we share our own stories.
Yeah.
And how there's an appropriate way to do this and an inappropriate way, of course, but how we can be transparent as we share, like, hey, like I struggled with depression, or I struggle with anxiety, or I struggle with some other mental health challenge. Signals to youth like, oh, you can struggle with this.
Right. Even as an adult.
Right. How we preach and talk about like mental health, not as like, back in my day, sometimes talking about mental health was like, just pray it away, or like it's a demon, sort of demonic force, and demonic forces exist, and spiritual warfare is real. I'm not knocking any of that, but oftentimes mental health gets lumped into that in really unhelpful ways, actually hurtful ways for people. So when we preach about it, when we talk about it, being like, hey, and some of you need to go get therapy.
Yeah.
Right. So just as a sort of test vehicle of like identifying the challenges that our kids are facing and being able to minister to those things is really, really important. So besides mental health, I'm curious what other things you notice, because you also have a background in public education and you're around our teenagers all the time. What other kinds of things are registering as challenges in the lives of our teens and our youth?
I mean, I think having the church be a safe space for them, even when they're doubting or questioning their faith. I do see and hear that. I do think that teens are questioning their faith a lot more than maybe when we were teens, we questioned our faith, which I think,
like how so? Say more.
I think we waited. It feels like a lot of my friends didn't question their faith until they were like in their 20s. If that makes, they went through youth group, like did the motions, like believed everything. And then when they got into their 20s, they all, like not all, but a lot of them left the faith. And I think our teens today are doing more of like actually asking the hard questions earlier, which I actually think is a really healthy and good thing to do. And maybe that means that when they're grown, they won't have not completely, because there's always a chance for people to come back, but they won't have left the faith. They've been able to question in a safe environment that allows them to ask the really hard questions, or even name, hey, like we all go through seasons of doubt, right? Or we all go through moments where we think, this is kind of weird. Or we don't have answers. Right. Yes. And that's not a crisis. That's real. I think that's really helpful. And I think our kids they're questioning the faith in ways that I wasn't. So I have teenagers. Yes. So they're questioning things like, is the Bible true? Or is it a reliable source? Is God trustworthy? Is a major one that we got from that Woven book. For sure. Who wrote that book? Do you remember? Putting you on the spot. Oh gosh. No, I can't remember what her name is. Just Google Woven. It's a great book. Well, it'll come to you in like 10 minutes. Yeah. Like, is God trustworthy is a big question in that book. But then also, like my teenagers, we're having a lot of conversations about like how being a Christian in this world looks. So when it comes to like gun reform or legislation or mass shootings, for instance, we're talking about like how we're making sense of that in light of what does the Christian say to this, right? Or with all of the Supreme Court rulings happening even this last like 2 weeks, what does the Christian witness and voice sound like in like politics? And what's like with all these real life things, and really at the heart of those questions that I'm asking, and now alongside my teenagers, like I have those questions. What we're really getting at is like what matters to God, and what does God do about what matters to God? I think are really interesting questions. And as a parent, the temptation is for me to like, not rant, but like go off and be like, well, here's all the things I'm thinking about. Right. I have to like watch myself and pause myself, because I'll get going, because this is super interesting to me. I do it for a living, right? But to create space for our kids to tell me what you think. Right. And to
then
wonder
when they,
and not give them the answers all
right,
the time.
that's what I mean.
Yeah. And like give them space to kind of think about it or like name some things or even argue or disagree.
Even disagree. Yeah. So like talk about this. How do you disagree? What can disagreement with teenagers look like? And not just about like my favorite color is green. No, my favorite, that not inconsequential stuff, but how do you disagree with a teenager over really things that feel really significant to you?
I mean, I think it's hard. And I really think there are several of our folks going through this right now and wondering how to do it. And I don't think they've figured out the answer. They're just like,
but you have the answer, right?
No, I do not.
Get ready because Melissa's going to share the answer.
I mean, I think they're just trying things and seeing if it works, like all parents do, and being like, well, that did work or that didn't work. But I do think that I've heard several parents talk about how they've apologized to their kids.
Yeah, I do that all the time.
And I think that's huge. Where as a parent, I think that helps with mental health because I think it helps with this strive for perfection and then it also helps with your relationships because as kids, you grow up knowing that your parents aren't perfect because you see them make mistakes and own them and apologize for them.
Maddie has this look that she gives me when she knows that I made a mistake or I'm wrong or being kind of dumb about something. And I know it too. And she looks at me sort of in this way and it just like, we just smile at each other. And she gives me time. She doesn't even say anything. She's so great. She gives me time to like own it and say, okay, that was dumb.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was wrong. But our teenagers, they're like, it's weird going from kids to young adults.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Because they're young adults.
Yeah.
And they're talking like young adults and they're disagreeing like young adults. And I find myself like the other day we were talking about something and I was like, hey guys, it's really important that you don't just sort of take someone's word for something. Or if someone repeats a lie enough times, it doesn't make it true. You have to actually like, don't be ignorant, do the work, go figure it out, like do some research and don't just turn to like a news pundit or, like people who just don't have the receipts and the footnotes. Like go dig up the footnotes and the receipts. Read the like the original documents, the Supreme Court rulings, like the actual articles. Go do the work. Don't be a sucker. And Mateo had a really good point. He said, "Well, Dad, but what if? How can you tell that sometimes when people are watching things or reading things?" Sometimes it's hard to tell if this is reliable.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like, and people have the sense I am doing the work, but it's like not a great source. Right. So we're having these really adult conversations about,
because adults are asking these same exact questions.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what was interesting is, I'm sort of just telling stories here, but what struck me about that was his challenge to me made me think deeper about, well, how do you tell if you're really doing the work and if you're thinking carefully and critically, right? And who can you trust? And I was sitting there going, man, that's a good one. And then communally, like as the three of us or the four of us in the kitchen, Michelle and I and Maddie and Mateo, we're like, well, here are some important things to us that help us vet reliable, trustworthy sources and like the way people are thinking about things. And it came down to the characteristics that really resemble Jesus of Nazareth.
Yeah.
Do these people care for people unlike them? Do they see injustice? Do they have mercy and compassion? Do they pursue the cause of the poor and the overlooked? Are they just protecting themselves and their interests and the powerful? Or is there a self-giving, a self-emptying love being expressed in not only their track record, but the things they say? Is there integrity? So like even in these that's like a political kind of question, but even in those questions we're returning to Jesus and saying, but does it look like this? And hopefully offering to them like an evaluative grid, a way of thinking critically about the world and their lives, right?
Yeah. And hopefully our church is giving those vibes.
Right.
Like that our teens are able to see Jesus in our church. They're able to ask those same questions and see the choices that we've made or the way that we talk to them or the way that we love them. They're able to see Jesus through that.
And talk about this, because you intentionally create spaces in the classes and even in our teen classes and through our kids classes to wonder and ask questions. There's a culture there. What's that like? Because I think if you describe that a little bit, a lot of parents don't get to go into those classrooms, right?
Yeah.
But if you can describe that, it might give some ideas for how parents could do that at home.
For sure. I mean, first I'll give a shout out. That was like a Lauren McCain thing.
Yeah.
She like started that, and she really, when she started, helped start up the family ministry at Res. Like that was, I remember talking to her about how that was a really big deal. She wanted the kids and the teens to be able to ask questions. And so a lot of our teens that we have now were kids when Lauren led them and taught them as kids. And so she created this culture of asking hard questions,
wondering together.
And wondering.
Yeah.
So I think that helped the whole situation. And so as a parent, like allowing even your young kids to wonder and not always knowing the answers, I think is really important. And wondering together, being like, I don't know, what do you think? But I think creating that space for teens is also really important, because teens, I think they sometimes tend to shut down when adults act like they know everything.
Yeah. And you can see it.
Yeah. And they like know that you don't know.
Yeah.
And so, again, just allowing yourself to, and that's hard sometimes as an adult to be like, I don't know.
That's so scary as an adult.
That's a really good question.
Too, right? Because it feels like we should know. This is our job. We're supposed to like help our kids. But actually the most helpful thing can be not your answer, but modeling some like humility and just being honest.
Yeah.
Being vulnerable with your kids.
Right. I think one of the teens asked in the Lord's Prayer class, they asked something along the lines of like, how do you know that God's going to take care of you? Or how do you know that God's going to provide? And I was like, I don't. And I have to like every day make a decision and a choice to trust.
Yeah. That's really tough.
And
but that's
honest,
right,
for them to be able to hear that they're not going to like, or have the expectation that they're going to arrive.
Mm-hmm. And it prepares them for how life actually goes and not just some tightly controlled, sanitized version of life. Lives are really messy. So it's really difficult.
Right. And there are some days that you wake up or something happens and you're like, I don't really want to trust you right now. I need a little space.
Totally. I don't feel like praying right now. Okay.
Fair. Yeah. And I think that's honest. And I mean, we see people in the Bible, we hear stories and we see people in the Bible do stuff like that all the time.
Oh yeah. And worse. I mean,
way worse.
The Psalms full of it. So I wanted to move into like talking about like, so we talked about like why our youth is important, some of the things they're dealing with in their world, how we can, how as we as adults can like create spaces for kids to wonder and work out their faith and not have, and also can we just lastly register like, and when kids express doubt or even like a lack of interest in the faith, to not be alarmed and to not overreact, but to remember that actually this child is God's idea and God loves this child, this teen, way more than any of us do, and is at work. Yeah. Even when you're not.
And that looks different for all kids. And sometimes that means for your kid in particular, they might need some space. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And another thing that comes to mind is like, and doing this is such hard work that parents need support too.
Yeah.
So like parents getting together especially in the church and saying, hey, I'm here for you. And I know this is hard and you're doing okay.
Yeah.
You're not the worst. You're doing okay.
For sure.
Because we hear some tough things from our kids sometimes, some tough challenges. It's hard. And so to have that camaraderie, that companionship with other adults is pretty good.
Well, and I think, especially if you have a household full of youth, even taking advantage of some of the youth activities or things that are like the first Sundays, if all of your kids are participating, like ask another family, like, hey, come to lunch with me.
Yeah, totally.
Like
Totally.
to build community and support
Mm-hmm.
amongst yourselves.
Yeah. That's always been a real help to me as a parent, is having other parents
Yeah.
to commiserate with and to lean on and to pray with, So as a church, so parents, hang in there. You're doing great. Teens, we love you. You're amazing. Like becoming a Christian is messy and difficult and costly work for everyone, regardless of your age. And we're doing that in community. So that's just, it's a lot. It's a lot. So as a community though, I thought it'd be really cool to name some of our some aims that I think are really important, like values about how we go about ministering to our youth and how we and what we want our youth to know about. Like, here's what we're up to. We're not trying to coerce you into a faith. We're not trying to force an opinion on you. We're following Jesus. We're fascinated by Jesus of Nazareth. We're Christians for a reason. Like, we really believe we have faith in Christ. And that is a gift that God gives. It's not something we can manufacture, not in ourselves or in anyone else, really. Yeah. So if that's true, then how do we then approach youth ministry? What are some of the important things? And I wanted to name a couple things. One, and I've heard you say this before, is one major thing is helping teenagers to find their story in God's story. Mm-hmm. And this is different than telling the teenager what their story is, or assuming the teenager's story is your family's story or is your story. But every teenager, every youth has their own story. Mm-hmm. It's unique. It's part of something, right? But it is their own. And them finding how their story fits into God's story is something that they have to do, right? With support, but it's their story. They own it, right? It's theirs. How does their story fit into God's story? I'm curious if that's a value. How do we work that out as a church? What does that look like?
I mean, I think that looks like when we invite the youth to do like a catechism class, for instance, or a membership class. We're not asking them to make the decision about membership or about being confirmed before they take the class. Right. It's asking them to come into the class with an open heart, and then making an informed decision after they've learned and heard everything about the choice that they want to make. So giving them agency to make their own decisions, I think, is a big part of that.
And what if they decide not to? Like, also knowing that the consequence of them being like, I don't want to be confirmed, isn't like, well, you're not a part of the church anymore. Right. Or we don't like you.
Yeah. No, they can still be a part of the church. And fear not, parents. There are plenty of adults getting confirmed, and it's okay.
It's not the end of the world. Mm-hmm. And I another big part of this to me is, this sounds really basic, but asking kids about their story. Yeah. Like, some kids maybe haven't even told their story. No one's ever asked. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting to get a teenager to tell you their story. And as a church member, as a leader, and as an adult in their life, when you hear that story, to ask, again, really open-handedly, but do you see God at work in your life? Mm-hmm. Is there a story of God in your life? If not, that's okay too. But do you wonder, what is God up to in the story I'm telling about my life? It can be a really interesting way of inviting that. Maybe even more lightweight way of getting it, in conversations, could just be sharing your own origin story and sharing your own view of how you think God might be at work in your life, modeling that to the kids, to teens, and of what that looks like. Mm-hmm. Because some might be well, I didn't hear a voice from heaven, right? Or I didn't see a miracle, so God must not be at work in my life. There's other ways to model that for youth and to invite that out of them, right? Mm-hmm. And another way is, I think, asking and paying attention to youth about what's important to you. Mm-hmm. When you look out in the world right now, or in your life, your social circles, your school, what's important to you? What do you really love? And what do you feel? What do you passionate about making right in the world?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then in those answers, those responses, paying attention to the ways that those naturally coincide with the things God really loves,
Yeah.
the things God's really passionate about, the things that God really wants to make right in the world.
And then naming and noticing that God put those things on their heart.
Yeah.
So there's the evidence that God's at work in them.
It sounds like evangelism.
It does.
Like asking, hey, who are you? And tell me your story and what makes you tick. And not listening in order to find some like way in or like manipulate people, but like finding yourself in those genuine natural moments where you're like, like what you're into. It reminds like it is like one of the reasons I am a Christian, because I care about that too. And I think God cares about that.
Yeah.
Is a way for people to see their stories and God's story connected.
For sure.
And so that's a kind of a cool way to go about it with our youth. Another thing, teens need an invitation to, and some intentionality to belong. Yeah. So like what's so important about youth having an experience of deep belonging in a church community?
Right. Yeah.
Why is that so important?
I think that was huge for me as a teen, that I felt loved and my church felt like a safe place for me. And it's where my friends were. But it also gave me opportunities to serve. I remember as a teen, like teaching kids choir classes and like doing VBS and all of that, because that was my a strength and something that I enjoyed being around kids, and I enjoyed helping and serving in that way. And so inviting our teens into space, like giving them spaces where they can build community with other teenagers, but also with other adults. And they can do that through serving in the church in ways that kind of scratch some of their strengths that they have. And it doesn't have to be with like the kids or in music, which seem to be the two that kind of lend themselves. Like we saw this past Sunday, it can be in other areas of like welcome table. Yeah. That was a big one that your two girls were like, I really liked being at the welcome table. And, or like, Liam, he really loved being crucifer. And he didn't realize how much he would enjoy doing something like that.
Or Juliet reading the prayers of the people.
Yeah, for sure.
And being like, I love this.
Yeah, all those spaces that maybe we wouldn't have thought to invite them into and put them on a regular rotation of being able to be a part of our church. And that because when you serve, that's when you feel like you're a part of the church community, because you are like helping build something. Yeah.
And that's the way it works for everybody, which is kind of funny, right? Another thing that strikes me is like, for our adults and for our teens too, like, I hope you guys are listening. You listen to podcasts, right?
I don't know.
That's a good question. That's a good question.
We'll ask tonight.
If you're under the age of, what is it? 18 and you're listening to this, just let us know. That'd be kind of cool. But I think like the piece, we often go to like, do you greet teenagers? Do you like acknowledge and see and know the names of the youth in our church? That'd be a great challenge. If you have not yet, try it. Yeah. You're an old person and you're kind of cringe, as they say, or weird and awkward. Own it. We're all awkward and weird. There's no escaping that. Should have heard my sermon. That was like the most uncomfortable I've been in a long time in a pulpit. And I was told, hey, you just need to own it. You're weird. But I think acknowledging our kids in the piece, our teens, being like, hey, it's good to see you. How's it going? And knowing their names, it goes a long way. Yeah. I think for kids being seen and belonging in the church. But also, I think another sort of sub point of belonging in the church is about uniformity. What we're aiming for, not uniformity, but solidarity, unity. Talk a little bit about like the difference between those two values, like maybe even in your own life, like being like the thing that's coming to mind honestly is the passage about conforming to the image of Christ. But the way that often gets used or can be used in a misled way is to expect people to conform to a certain way of being a Christian. Yeah. Or a certain culture, a certain way things are, And that can be really stifling to, I think, anyone really, but also our youth.
Yeah.
And we're not asking for uniformity or conformity in that kind of way, because we are not Christ.
Right.
But as adults and leaders in their life, we're looking for something else, like solidarity and unity. What does that look like?
I mean, I think that's why we've created youth classes so that we can, and like the way that we, like you led the high school class and I led the middle school class, where we opened up discussion points for them to disagree or for them to ask hard questions. Because I think sometimes conforming can look like just sitting and like
saying the right answer.
Yeah.
Right.
And saying the right answer and
Jesus.
for sure. And so I think offering up space and offering grace for when people and teens make mistakes or do something silly that teenagers do, you know? Oh, and also just like letting them be teens.
Right.
You know?
They're not grown adults.
Yeah. They're going to be dumb.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, we're grown adults and we're dumb all the time.
Right. But they're just going to like do silly things. They're going to do they're going to do risky things.
Teen things.
Because that's what they're supposed to do. And actually, like, it's really good for them to do those things, to be risky and to be silly, because they're in a safe space. And so offering church as being a safe space and being a place where it's like, hey, you can make mistakes and it's okay.
Yeah.
Like,
we're still here for you,
We're
right?
still here for you. We're still going to love you. And we're not going to like discipline you overly or like shame you. But discipline's not the right answer. We're not going to shame you in any way.
And teenagers are, I mean, I remember being a teenager here. I sound like an old guy and I am, but we're trying to figure a lot out.
Yeah.
We're trying to figure out the world. We're trying to figure out who we are, what it means to be a Christian. And we're like surging with energy and opinions and confusing things. Like it's being a teen feels like you're in a laboratory and you're pushing boundaries and you're questioning things and wondering in different ways and taking up space in the world and becoming your own person. That's kind of a messy process. And so your point about grace, I think, is super important. Because that process can be frightening as a parent or as an adult in their life to witness if you're like really concerned for them. And we're not saying be hands off or like check out. No, be connected, but also give a little bit of breathing room and space for kids to be kids and teenagers to be teenagers, and yet be a safe place for them to say, hey, that was, you can still say it at the appropriate time. Like, that was a really dumb idea. It's not the end of the world, but let's get back on track. Like, can I help you? Can I walk with you through this?
Right.
Is way different than super legalistic, heavy-handed, like soul-crushing, shaming church discipline.
Yeah.
And I think if we can become the kind of church that teenagers trust to care for them like that, then they'll be honest. Yeah. They'll share their life with us, and we can walk with them. I think that's the point.
I agree.
Yeah. So another thing, tell communal stories of what God has done with us.
Yeah.
And when we talk about us, include our youth. The thing that comes to mind for me is our church transition last year and how our youth were part of that, how they stood up and, testified, man. They like some of the most impactful moments in our process of, that our process that recently was seeing how our youth were part of it and led in it and spoke up about it, and also how they reflected with us about what they were noticing. Yeah. That is an us story. Yeah. So anytime we get a chance to tell us stories, I think with our youth included and in mind, can reinforce not only that sense of belonging, but also say, hey, you're really important to us.
I think with giving too, like all the stories we've been talking about with giving and incorporating youth into that as well, and helping them see that they're, because I know some of them did the membership class and felt challenged to start giving. And so, and
serving and like stepping in all these ways, right? Yeah. I heard that.
Yeah. And so, including them in those kinds of stories as well.
Absolutely. And it's sort of like when that happens, when it clicks for kids, it's like, oh man, where have you been? Like we are so excited to welcome you into like adulthood in the church. This is awesome. It sort of like occurs to me like, we really got to pay attention because these are like, young adults.
Yeah.
They're adulting. And it sort of catches us by surprise. And it's like, this is amazing.
No, and I think it's really cool that this never happened with me as a kid growing up, where there was a moment where I was always just a member because my parents were a member.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Right.
Which is the case now. But there's a moment where when they're 16, they can take the membership class and actually become like a voting member. And I think that's a really cool space that we can offer for teens to feel a part of our church community.
We just had today, our admin was like, hey, so all these kids are giving. Do I need to set up their own giving accounts so that they get an annual report about what they've given? And I'm like, heck yeah, you should. Like, how cool is that?
That's awesome.
Like that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Last thing I think is really interesting is opening up space to ask the 3 big questions. I got this from the Full Youth Institute. They have a book called 3 Big Questions. And it's what they're demonstrating or trying to help us understand is like, anytime you can create an opportunity to listen to teenagers talk about these questions, that's a win. Yeah. In terms of discipleship, there's a big win. And the 3 are, who am I? Where do I fit? And what difference do I make? Yeah. Or can I make? I would have to agree that these aren't really just good for teenagers. These are great for everybody.
No, they are. Yeah, for sure.
But especially kids who are forming their identity, who am I? It isn't something that we just hope that our kids can sort out on their own. Right. Say, good luck. Let me know who you are when you figured it out. But identity is always communal. Yeah. Right. And so one thing that strikes me about this question, it's really compelling, is being able to not only listen to teenagers sort out who they are, but also as adults to speak into their life and say, here's who I think you are in really constructive and encouraging ways. Like, I see this in you. Right. Early on in my life, my youth pastors said things to me that still stuck with me about like that I didn't believe about myself or I wasn't sure about. And they'd say, no, Sean, this is who you are. I see it. Everybody sees it. This is who God's made you to be. That could be so powerful when people do that. And also when there are times when maybe like everybody, we get confused about who we are. We doubt who we are. Yeah. To be able to remind our kids, like I did on Sunday, it was something I was really passionate about, was saying to our youth, you don't have to make your life matter. Yeah. You don't have to go prove yourself. Because you are God's idea, your life matters. Right. Because of God's love, you are already invaluable to us and to God. Like, you've already arrived with those questions. I think reminding our teens of those truths, and really everyone, is really a sacred thing, a responsibility that we have. For sure. And that's like, what difference can I make? Or even what difference do I make? Yeah. Like naming the differences that they already make. Yeah, you do. It matters that you're here. It makes a difference. Where do I fit? That's an interesting question. This is the second of those 3. Yeah. I think this is why it's so important to help kids find their place to serve and to lead. Yeah. And even to speak up. Yep. Give feedback. And then lastly, what difference can I make? You just mentioned this goes beyond like, I think even church life stuff, but like in the world and in the lives of your neighbors and other people, right? I think that's even like more important, especially for teens, because most of their life is, well, even for adults, but most of their life is at school right now. And so thinking about what kind of difference can they make with their friends, or do they make in their middle schools and high schools? I think that kids don't realize the difference that they can make. I think that's the thing. It's a long lesson to learn, because kids, like teens right now, can make a huge difference. And I wonder if they know that. Right. And a lot of it is, I think when I was a teen, I didn't think that I didn't realize that just loving my friends was making a difference. Huge difference. even more so than like a lot of the other things that maybe we were told to do.
Right. And relationships are so big for, for teenagers, friendships and relationships, and just loving your friends and being there for your friends. I mean, that's being Jesus with skin on.
Totally. Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's really beautiful. So, those are really interesting questions. I'll repeat it again. Who am I? Where do I fit? What difference can I make? That would be an interesting thing to have in your back pocket as you're like thinking through conversations at home with your kids, or as we, as leaders in the church, and adults are wondering, like, how do we minister to our youth and to each other? This is the sacred work of us as a church, is opening up space in our church for our youth to ask these questions genuinely with a connection to us as we ask those questions too. That's the vision for youth ministry, I think, for us at Res. So as I think there's a good place to land and make this sort of invitation to the rest of the church as we're building this youth ministry. But by the way, like, Melissa, you may not know, is our director of family, a part of which is youth, but that's not her primary focus. And in the meantime, like, we don't have a full-time youth pastor or something like that. We are teaming up. You're taking a bulk of the work, but we're teaming up as a staff and clergy team to put together a church family-based model of youth ministry.
Yep.
And so that's why we're talking about this so much and relaying all this information about our values and our ministry posture to this as a church, because it takes a village.
Yeah.
And we want our adults to go, wait a second, I love teens. I would love to be a part of this work in their life. How can I help?
Yeah. We need people who love teens. Not everybody loves teens.
Yeah. I mean,
so if you're one of those people, like, you can make a difference. Number 3.
Boom. Look at that.
Number 2, you fit in youth ministry.
You do, especially if you have a heart for it. And if you like self-disqualify yourself, and you're thinking, but I don't have a lot of answers about faith in the Bible, and that's okay.
That means you fit even more.
You fit even more. And we'll help with that too. So if you're listening to this and going, man, this is really interesting, there's something about this kind of ministry to our youth and our teens that strikes me, reach out to us, let us know, because we could really use your help. We'd be eager to be connected with you. Is there anything else you'd want our listeners, watchers to know about our youth?
We are creating a catechism class so that our teens, our older teens, can get confirmed in the church. But we're not just like stopping there. We're also thinking about how we can build classes for younger youth and younger kids to build them and get them ready for catechism classes. So that's happening. And
just a footnote here, confirmation is a celebration of like sort of a milestone in a person's life when they have come to an understanding of the faith that they can now inhabit on their own and take their rightful place as a member, an adult member of the church, someone who's like, I believe this,
right?
I own this, and I need the church's help. And so what the bishop comes, lays hands on the confirmands and asks for the Holy Spirit to bless these people, to fill them with the Spirit's power and gifting so that they can carry out the mission and ministry of Jesus in the world with us. So it's a really beautiful, that's what confirmation's about. So we got this like process of bringing kids up to speed, getting to the place where they can make that decision if they want to do that or not. So that's pretty exciting. Melissa, thanks for talking about this. I'm really grateful for the work you're doing with our family, but also with our youth. And for everybody listening and watching, thanks a lot for being with us. We'll see you next time.